I'm your host, Georgie Barrett, and now it's time for the closing general session of the Global .next digital experience. We so hope that you've enjoyed the last day and a half hearing from Nutanix experts and your peers as we've really explored the advancements we're making in hybrid and multi-cloud technologies. I mean, it can be tough going, but the industry is certainly making headway. Now, someone who knows a thing or two about a tough job is Mike Rowe, as he's attempted quite a few of them as host of Dirty Jobs. His face and voice should be familiar to most of us because, you know, he's everywhere on TV, from the Discovery Channel to Nat Geo to even doing commercials for the Ford Motor Company. Mike Rowe is going to be in conversation with Nutanix CIO Wendy Fifer. Enjoy.
Thank you, Georgie. Mike Rowe, I cannot believe you are here in the flesh. Hello.
I'm here in the virtual flesh, in my actual office, talking to the genuine Wendy. I can't think of any place else I'd rather be.
Same here, same here. I just need you to say a few words. That voice is so iconic. I've heard it everywhere.
January, the Bering Sea.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I am so thrilled to speak with you. And today I was just hoping that you and I could spend a little bit of time talking about the tough job that we have ahead of us right now. It's not just about rebuilding our companies and rebuilding our civic structures, but in IT, and for many of our listeners and watchers today, it's about finding ways for us to use technology to move our companies and our schools and our country and our society forward. So I thought maybe we could just start by you giving us a little bit of context. Tell us about some of the work that you do and especially this focus that you have on the toughest jobs, the most difficult jobs. Why did you start out there? Why did you move in that direction?
Well, I think right now uncertainty is one of the things that's defining our country. It's defining the conversations we have. It's very, very difficult regarding work to look forward with anything resembling certainty. But one of the things we can control is the prevailing definition of what a good job is. That's always in flux. And when I started Dirty Jobs back in 2003, it was really a rumination on work and a celebration of jobs that often take place out of sight and out of mind. So in some ways, Dirty Jobs was the granddaddy of essential working shows, where we tried to shine a spotlight on jobs that most people didn't know existed in towns they typically couldn't find on a map, that were being performed by people rooted in anonymity. Well, if you think of work in those terms, your industry is not so different than that of a plumber. So much of what you guys do happens out of sight and out of mind. So part of the conversation has to be to elevate the job itself within your industry and to make sure people understand the impact they're having on the rest of civilized life. That primarily was the theme of a TV show called Dirty Jobs, where I worked as an apprentice on 300 different gigs. Today, I think part of the answer to your question has to do with the phraseology that's dominating the headlines, which of course is essential. What is essential work? It's a different way of asking the same question, what is a good job? And how we define that is absolutely critical. In my world, I run a foundation now called MicroWorks, and we focus on training opportunities that don't require a 4-year degree, because part of closing the skills gap means making a more persuasive case for 7 million open positions that require training instead of a university experience. So I think the conversation that needs to happen right now is one that really brings us back to what is essential. And of course, it's a trick question, because the better query is what isn't essential. And as we look at individual jobs and individual workers who are out there doing what they do, we also have to look at the 40 million people who have just lost their jobs and then ask the question, what did we just say to them? Did we just say that they're not essential? Because you can look at the impact on the economy and then quickly conclude that all work is connected, all jobs are essential, and everybody, whether they know it or not, is part of a much larger mosaic or tapestry.
Yes, speaking of that tapestry and that interconnection, I think sometimes, particularly the jobs that we are really relying on now, manufacturing jobs, jobs that get goods and services into the supply chain, food service jobs, food preparation jobs, the jobs like IT jobs, keeping data centers up and running, keeping networks up and running. Those jobs are so essential, and yet we have this huge divide, right? They're invisible. The work is invisible. The jobs are invisible. At the same time that the work and the jobs are invisible, we're relying on them even more. Even as you and I are speaking right now, we're relying on, our home Wi-Fi and, sort of invisible bits flying between us on the wire. If you are a person who is in that essential work that's invisible, how do you have kind of the strength of your job, your conviction to move forward?
People ask me all the time, what did that cohort know? What did those people know that the rest of us seem to have forgotten? And why is everybody having so much fun, right? On that show, we constantly were showing you examples optically of people you would think would be miserable because they were covered in somebody else's crap or because they were in a very dangerous situation. And yet, by and large, there was a joie de vivre. There was a band of brothers mentality. And so people wanted to know why. Why are they having a better time than it seems like they're supposed to be having? And the answer was, or at least part of the answer, is constant feedback. People with dirty jobs almost always know how they're doing because they're surrounded by visual cues that are undeniable. My office down here, it looks pretty much the same at 5 p.m. as it does at 5 a.m. I glance around. There's no measurable metric for progress. But if you're working in a septic tank, or if you're high up on a bridge welding, or you fill in the blank, you can just look around and you can see how you're doing. You can gauge your progress. It's a small thing, but it's an exponentially very, very powerful thing. And you can always find people who don't have that component of feedback in their day-to-day jobs, which makes their own engagement with the work all the more challenging. So the next level is, all right, well, how do you engage people who don't have that optical feedback? And smarter people than I have written thick books about this, but for me, it comes down to a kind of appreciation. Mm-hmm. The skills gap in our country, 7.5 million open jobs. I don't think it's a problem in and of itself. I don't think $1.6 trillion in outstanding student debt is a problem in itself. I think these things are symptoms of our larger relationship with work societally. And I think the broken part of that relationship has to do with a lack of appreciation or a fundamental misunderstanding or lack of awareness. And this is where the mystery of the work comes in. In my world, in the dirty jobs world, if a consumer flicks a switch and the lights come on and they're not immediately struck by the miracle of that, then there's a disconnect that ultimately manifests itself in kind of a lack of appreciation, both for the electrician and the lineman and the incredible architecture that allows that miracle to happen. Likewise, you flush the toilet after taking care of business, and that which is supposed to be whisked away, in fact, is not whisked away, right? We're either gobsmacked by the miracle of our infrastructure or we aren't. And I think, to answer your question, the same is true of high-tech jobs. So many people in your industry are laboring out of sight and out of mind. And so many end users are no longer properly gobsmacked by the miracle of whatever fairy dust it is you guys sprinkle onto the cloud that allows us to have this conversation. And so if you start to look at work through the lens of your own personal relationship with it, your own appreciation for it, you'll look at the UPS driver differently. You'll look at the IT specialist differently. You'll look at the definition of a good job differently. And you'll also, and this is really important, you'll look at the definition of a good education differently. It's all part of that mosaic that we were talking about. And when we try to separate blue collar from white collar, good jobs from bad jobs, 2-year schools from 4-year schools, essential from non-essential, it's like pulling on a loose thread on a sweater. You'll get it out, but somewhere on the other side of the garment, things are going to bunch up and get weird. So it's another long way of saying our workforce has to be balanced, and right now it isn't, and that's very bad.
So, Mike, talking about those 40 million people out of work in the United States and those 7 million open jobs, how do we turn the page in our society, right? It's so different now than it even was 6 months ago.
You know, I said at the beginning of this thing, like a lot of other people, that we're all in the same boat, and I take that back. I wouldn't say that today, honestly. I would say we're all in the same storm. The boats are different. The people are different. I mean, the challenges are different, and the stakes are different. And some people navigate this storm very easily. Some people are in yachts. Some people are in dinghies. Some people are just treading water. You know, they don't have a boat. And so, you know, part of the trap, in my view, as we look forward, is to be very suspicious of cookie cutter advice. It's so tempting. It's so tempting to fall back on bromides and platitudes and tropes. But that's the thing right now. Advice that's good for somebody could be completely damaging to somebody else. It's tempting, for instance, to always tell people to stay the course and be resolute and persist. That only makes sense if you're going in the right direction, you know?
Right.
And,
right.
You know, I talk like this a lot in my own foundation because one of the bromides that really has impacted our workforce is this idea that the best path for the most people is a 4-year degree. Now, I have one. I have nothing bad to say about it. But when you start telling tens of millions of people that they're doomed without that, and at the same time you remove shop class from high schools, thereby eliminating optically the mere existence of hundreds of important jobs from millions of school kids, well, then you set the table for the exact situation we have right now. A ton of debt, a ton of graduates who can't find work in their chosen field, and at the same time, 7.5 million open jobs, many of which will pay a 6-figure salary, but people aren't trained for them. And so, again, a long way to answer your question is to say we need better PR for work in general. We are, I believe, disconnected from the very basics of work in our country. And as we navigate this storm, and as we try and figure out what kind of boat we're in, we just need to be mindful of the unintended consequences of dispensing cookie cutter advice. And look, it's a very political thing to do. You know, that's how politicians get elected. They have to talk in bromides. Unfortunately, that's how journalists get ratings. They talk in bromides and platitudes and sweeping generalizations. And now, too, I'm afraid in many cases our medical community is doing the same thing. We're awash in dogma, and people are trying to understand on a micro level what they can do to stay on their feet. My advice, learn a skill that's in demand. Hit the reset button if you have to, and then work your butt off.
So, Mike, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a fairy princess or an astronaut. Sadly, that didn't work out, and instead I had a career in IT. An IT career involves lots of nights and weekends and every Thanksgiving and Christmas doing rollouts and upgrades and so on. And until I watched your show, I used to think, why would anyone choose a job in IT? It's the worst job ever. But now that I have watched your show, I realize there might be worse jobs. Can you tell us just a little bit about what's among all the horror that you have witnessed and observed? What's the worst?
It's a question I get a lot, and my honest answer involves a mental image in my mind of like a roulette wheel. And on the wheel are any one of 30 different jobs I did that could easily be an honest answer to that question. So I just kind of spin it in my head and stop, wait to see where it stops. I mean, I can tell you stories about skull cleaning. I can tell you shark suit tester. Bad job,
Ooh.
Right? You're at the bottom of the ocean. You're wearing a chainmail suit and you let sharks bite you and shake you like a tug toy. I don't recommend that, but I met the guy who invented the shark suit and I tested it with him,
Wow.
Bucket list thing. Getting a ruptured lift pump out of a wastewater treatment plant. Now, this is a job that is directly linked to civilized life and one of the few jobs left in wastewater treatment that has to be done manually. IT cannot help you. The cloud cannot help you.
At Nutanix, we have an internal description of our culture. We say that we are always trying to remain hungry, humble, and honest. And I think based on your description, you definitely could be an honorary Newton for sure. But I think that drives all of us in so many industries, right? We work, of course, because we need to, and we care about what we do. Maintaining that sense of humility allows us to bring our best every day. And then we're honest when we make mistakes or we can't handle it or we blew it, and we go back and try to make it better somehow. And it's great to hear that's a common thread throughout all of the hard jobs, all of the difficult and dirty jobs.
Well, from my own perspective, I also try and look at it through the lens of what I would watch as a viewer. What do I enjoy as a consumer? And this, I think, can also be applied to just about any vocation. But if you think about comics, the people who make me laugh the hardest are the people who are seemingly trying to amuse themselves first and foremost, right? When I see a comic working really hard to get me to laugh, then I put him or her, I can see their technique. I see them trying. And that makes it harder, both for them and for me. And so, whether it's a singer, I don't want to see a singer laboring and struggling and making it look hard. I want to see them joyfully doing the thing they're great at. So I think you can make the case for just about any job. When you see people who are doing what they were seemingly born to do, there's almost always a component of that person trying to amuse themselves or challenge themselves. The business of being great at a thing is almost always a symptom of that, I think.
I would have to agree with you there.
I just realized I sounded pretty wise there, Wendy, didn't I?
That was inspiring. Thank you, a wise one, Mike Rowe. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being with us here at .next.
I say we do it again tomorrow, Wendy. Date?
Sounds good.
Now we're going to dive into perhaps the most critical factor in enterprise data center and cloud technologies, security. To lead the conversation, here is Chief Product Security Officer Indu Prakash Carey.
Hello, and welcome to the closing keynote at this virtual .next. Appropriately enough, this is focused on security. Truth be told, there has never been harder for a security professional. As if the journey from the enterprise to the multi-cloud environment was not complicated enough, you now have the added complexity of COVID-19, whereby employees who used to work from a relatively regulated and secure office environment to one where they're distributed all over the planet and they can work from anywhere. Fortunately, such time of complexity and enormous change also presents us with opportunity. And we at Nutanix have been asking ourselves the question, what if we could make use of the current disruption to make security invisible? All right, everyone, welcome to the first section of our security keynote. I'm really excited to introduce three industry experts to this panel. Virginia Gumbel, who is a board member at Nutanix and as part of her professional services consulting firm, advises business leaders and CIOs on all matters business and IT related. YG John, who runs a security incubator and who has been in the security industry for over 25 years. And then Sumedh Thakkar, who is the chief product officer and president at Qualys, one of the industry leaders in the world of security. As we stated in the beginning, security complexity is the big problem. At least that's one of our hypotheses as we enter the next several years. And so I want to turn that over to the panelists. And Virginia, I want to start with you. In your vantage point as a board member, what is your perspective on security complexity? Is this something that you think is a reality, or do you think we are killing ourselves?
Well, it certainly has been the reality for quite a while, and still we're hopeful that on the horizon this will actually change. However, if you think about the plethora of security tools, you think about how organizations have to structure themselves and the dynamics between the technology organization, the security organization, and also the CISO. And then we have the reporting. There is such a myriad of reporting structures and formats that are out there. Some give updates on events, some give us assessments, others give us vulnerability, visibility. And so it's enormously complex for boards and senior leadership teams.
Thank you, Virginia. Sumedh, as a leading provider of security solutions and products to your customers, what do you hear from customers about security complexity?
I think this is the number one thing we hear, which is I have too many security solutions looking at one individual piece at a time, and it's too complex. And after deploying so many different security tools, I still don't get the visibility. Just like Virginia said, there's just too many different reports, etc. And security today is based more on the premise that you get a bunch of data and a lot of different people will sit there and go through that. And I think that worked maybe 15 years ago when people just had a few servers that they really focused on. But today, in the hyper-connected world where the infrastructure is so hybrid, there's just too many entry points into your application and infrastructure from containers, cloud, etc. And so individual point solutions are being used to protect those individual pieces, and that really causes the complexity that you have in security. This is something that if you look at the home alarm system, we have simplified that much more, where you have a much more of a different set of sensors, door sensors, window sensors, motion sensors, cameras connecting to central console and simplifying your security, where you get a big red, green, orange. We just don't have that in cybersecurity yet because of the complexity of how things have been deployed, because of organizational silos, maybe because of tool silos, but the reality today is that this is quite complex.
YG, why don't we see more companies like Duo Mobile? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think part of the challenge is the history as it relates to security, because when you think about the origins of where cybersecurity kind of come from, there's a lot of industry fascination and romanticizing of cybersecurity in the hacking community is like black magic, or like as though it was like ninja dark arts, if you will. Doug Song, who's the co-founder of Duo Security, is a friend of mine, and I remember talking with him about when he was forming Duo. The tagline for the company was the most loved security company in the world. That was their mission statement, both in and out, in terms of kind of building the culture. And so when he was building Duo Security, the whole concept was we really need to make security very easy for customers to actually become fans and ultimately fall in love with the solutions that we're actually bringing to the marketplace.
Thank you, YG. So it seems like we all agree that security complexity is a problem. And, when you want to solve a problem, you want to understand the why. So YG, if I could stay with you for a second, is it just the history that, we have built up so much security debt over the years? Is there more to it? Why do you think security has not been as easy as, let's say, some of the other equally complex technical problems? Is there something missing in how we approach security? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that it really comes from a number of different angles. So I'll just highlight two examples to be brief. So, for example, if you look at security compliance and the various standards that are out there, FedRAMP is a great example where I know that the Nutanix product suite just got certified back in May. So congratulations on that. But the hurdle that you actually had to go through to achieve that was over 325 controls. Certifying at high levels, 425 controls. So why does the government have to be so prescriptive when, in addition to that, you're also doing ISO certification, SSAE 16 SOC 2, PCI? All of these standards have a tendency to overlap, but there are so many regulatory bodies and authorities that want to tell you what you should do. The second example that I would talk to is that the industry over the last 25 years has become very fractured. I mean, the total addressable market, when you think about cyber solutions, is projected to be somewhere around $300 billion by 2024. And so many startups that I work with today are making it to a certain size and then are getting bought by a larger company for either strategic value, revenue accretion. And so the market, when you look at all of the different solutions, there are products, because there's such demand for making security easier, that people are releasing features as though they were products versus actually completely solving an actual problem.
So lack of instrumentation, lack of automation, and then being able to analyze the signals that you get from whatever instrumentation that you already have, those sound like some of the root causes. Sumit, would you agree with that? Is there other areas that or other challenges that make security so complicated today?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I mean, there's a couple things going on, right? One is with the expanding attack surface, as we talked about, there is a need to collect more data and more real-time visibility continuously. And so the older model of, okay, you could do an assessment based on your compliance need once a month, once a week or whatever it is, doesn't work. So you just need to have the ability to collect that data, because now you need to correlate that. So you need a single backend that you can really correlate all of this information into and provide this as a capability that essentially the IT folks can make security as part of their day-to-day routine. And today it does not. There is this tendency of we build something in a silo and then we throw it over the fence, and then it is somebody else's problem to manage and put the security around that. And I think if you take some of those things together, that's what's really causing the complexity, is because, as YG said, there's every little feature of cybersecurity is becoming a company and a different solution, a different agent, and a different console. And on top of that, the tendency of not building it in. I mean, it's similar, I think, from infrastructure perspective. At the end of the day, the business is not there to do cybersecurity. The business is there to do the business. And the infrastructure that is needed for that should have as much of this built in as possible, so that really you can secure right from the get-go. This is doing that by taking the complexity of different IT components like CPU, memory, storage, this, that, which in the past you had to go to multiple different vendors and try to get them to work. And then this firmware doesn't work with that thing and that disk and all of that, right? And Nutanix and the cloud providers, they have simplified this because you have one place, one console where you go and you can manage all these different components. They are integrated. They give you a single view. And that's really what, Qualys is also focusing on today to do that from a security perspective. But that's because that's what we hear here a lot from our customers is that I don't want to deploy 20 agents and then I have to do all the work to get them together. And so then because they don't communicate well, I don't still get a view of what is going on. And I think that's really, we have the opportunity with a platform like Nutanix to build that security in upfront so you go out as secure as possible right up front.
Thank you, Sumit. You said two things that really, really resonated with me. I think one is implicit in what you said is that it really takes a village. So you need a platform and an ecosystem. And the other part of, I think, what you said is we really need to pay attention to security design. And I would almost hazard that a lot of traditional security tools are by security tools for security people. And it almost as if we haven't taken into consideration sort of the design aspect of this. Would you agree with that, or do you think that's unfair?
No, I think traditional security tools have been more towards the post-deployment IT security teams where it's like we don't know what went in, so let's really focus on trying to protect. That's where the whole concept of a firewall came in. It's like I don't know what's inside, I don't know what's outside, but let me put something in between to try to protect. But if you had a better idea of exactly what you are protecting inside and a lot of the components were built in, then you will have a much better way to be able to provide security if you have the internal visibility on the platform upfront.
Thank you, Sumit. YG, if you had to imagine a future where security was built in and invisible, how do you think that might look? How do you think we might need to do something differently? Insanity, I think it was Einstein who said it's the trying to do the same thing again and again and trying to expect a different result. What do you think we need to do differently to imagine a world where security is invisible?
Well, talking about the complexity, using another Einstein quote there, genius is making complex ideas simple. If you think about what security is really about, it's ultimately about managing risks. Board members like Virginia have been managing risks for years, but we've made that more challenging by inventing our own jargon and talking about things like advanced persistent threats and crypto locking and all of these things that they don't mean anything. The same thing as I was talking a little bit earlier about being so prescriptive about what controls and what you need to do. A very close friend of mine once told me, you shouldn't should somebody. And instead, what you should do is focus on things that you can control, right? So what can you control? If you change security from saying, you know what, I need to implement multi-factor authentication over here, and I need to, look at all of my audit logs every 30 days, and I need to train all of my people annually in security where they're just flipping through slides trying to figure out a way to actually get the certificate without actually listening to the actual training. Instead of doing that, focus on the outcomes. What outcomes are you trying to prevent? We're trying to prevent people from stealing data. We're trying to prevent unauthorized people from getting access to valuable information. We're trying to make sure that our systems stayed online so they can't be, brought on offline, which again, we invent the interim denial of service. If you focus on the things that you can control, then go ensure the things that you can't. Because at the end of the day, everything's a threat. We're connected to the internet. So if you focus on the bad outcomes that you're trying to prevent and enable the good outcomes in terms of security by design, solutions that are actually safe and out and work out in the market that, you don't have to worry about patching anymore, right? If you just didn't have to worry about patching, think about what that would do for the world. So if you just focus on what it is that you can control, don't worry about the stuff that you can't, but go buy insurance for it. That's pretty simple.
Thank you, YG. Virginia, how would you describe for yourself from a board vantage point, what would invisible security look like for you? What would be nirvana for you?
Well, the first thing is I wouldn't need to have a CISO anymore. Which I think would be great. I mean, we've had CISOs and they're very important at this point in time, but ultimately, if we're going to think about security at conception, then we're just falling into the normal cadence of managing risk. But the ability to be able to have a dashboard that gave me a good sense of where we are. The problem is with the historical representation of what has happened in the past is not always an indicator of what's going to happen in the future. So being able to see potential future scenarios and where my existing vulnerabilities are is really important. For an example, not many people had on their risk register a global pandemic. They had many other items, but the global pandemic, to the extent that we've experienced in talking with a number of boards, was not exactly in the top 3 risks to manage. So I think the ability for us to assume that these things are all taking place in the fabric or in the construction, and then our constant ongoing ability to look at how that is evolving and giving us a greater sense of security for risk management purposes.
Thank you, Virginia. May I clarify one thing that you said? I think that's a provocative hypothesis that we may not need a CISO. Perhaps would you agree with the statement that maybe it becomes so built in to the fabric, like you said, that the role of the CISO becomes more a monitoring or a reporting role, and that the activities related to security are done where they're done most effectively? Would that be a fair way to state that?
Yes, and also, invoking a lot of predictive analytics that have a higher accuracy rate than what we may have today.
A special word of thanks to Sumedh, Virginia, and YG for sharing their expertise with us, both on why security is so complicated and how we might make security invisible.
Thank you
very much.
At Nutanix, customers represent our true north, and so we want to hear from a customer next. John Cusson runs both IT and security at JM Fin, and he has a unique perspective on what makes security complicated. Over to you, John.
My name is John Cosson. I am CIO and CISO at JM Fin, so I am in a unique position to wear both hats in my organisation. So the buck stops with me. JM Fin are a UK-based wealth manager with more than £10 billion in client assets. I have worked in IT and IT security for more than 35 years, starting with ICL mainframe computers in the mid-1980s, running an operating system called VME, or Virtual Machine Environment. A large part of my job is the protection of my organisation's key assets. This can be described as critical data, telecommunications, or a hyper-converged environment. However, one of the most critical assets I protect is probably the most difficult to protect, and that's humans. This has never been more important during the coronavirus lockdown at JM Fin, when 6 offices turned into 400 offices within a 5-day period, operating from bedrooms, kitchens, gardens, outhouses, and even hallways. The work surface has completely changed within a 5-day period. The UK government had directed all staff to work from home unless they were key workers. This was an enormous undertaking for many IT departments, especially those that hadn't invested in a virtualized desktop environment. However, the biggest challenge was to securely deploy more than 400 virtual workstations. On many computers, it should have been in a museum. I know the virtual desktops and the environment it ran on was solid. We had been using Nutanix for a few years, so I knew how reliable and scalable the solution was. But we needed to deploy hundreds of remote users, many of whom were technically challenged. How would our existing infrastructure, and particularly the security infrastructure, adapt to this new working practice? Over the past 2 years, JM Fin had upgraded our infrastructure, migrating our virtual environment from what many would see as a legacy-type deployment. This included separate storage, processors, and networking. We had also worked with our security vendors to ensure their solutions would work seamlessly with our new hyper-converged environment. Our approach to security has always been multi-layered, because whatever anybody tells you, there is no silver bullet. I do not believe one security vendor or solution can fully protect a business, whatever the salesperson says. But whilst it's true that no system is 100% secure, a series of well-deployed overlapping technologies that monitor, alert, and prevent attacks can make this very difficult for someone with malicious intent. There are a couple of challenges when creating a security environment. You need visibility across the network. It's going to be pointless unless you have full visibility across the whole of your landscape. It doesn't matter how fancy the technology is. The other challenge is false positives and monitoring. Many vendors will claim their technology works out the box and protects. Well, that may be possible in certain environments or in labs, but in reality, there is still far too many false positives in most security solutions. Whilst AI in security has made significant progress, I feel the human element is still required to ensure correct decisions are made. A classic example of this is a seam or a saw. But the absolute number one challenge is complexity. As IT security evolves, as does its attempts to align to business strategy, so the complexity has increased. I mentioned this earlier, but this is one of the biggest challenges for any security leader. I firmly believe there is no one-size-fits-all security solution. So CISOs and CIOs need to manage a plethora of different solutions, each with its own parochialism. COVID-19 has changed the world. Remote working will become mainstream for even the most traditional businesses. The term working from home has now become working from anywhere. The perimeter isn't broken, it's been shattered. IT security needs to align to this new work surface and protect all of the key assets of a business. Security and infrastructure solutions need to be simpler to deploy. And management needs to be simpler and easier to talk to other solutions. As Justin Trudeau proclaimed, this is the new normal. So business leaders, CISOs, CIOs, and other technology suppliers now need to align to their strategies to embrace this new normal. Thank you.
You know, one of my bosses used to say, repetition doesn't ruin the prayer. So I'll take a minute just to recap the key things we learned from John. One is, you always have to depend on multiple providers for your security posture. There is no magic bullet, and complexity is the biggest challenge. And so in this section of the panel, you're going to hear from multiple Nutanix leaders in terms of what we are doing to simplify security and make it more invisible. We're going to start with the leader of our IT operations and end-user computing, Sebastian. Over to you, Sebastian.
Thanks, Indu. It's been really a wild ride with this rapid change to 100% remote workforce. And we've tried to maintain this principle of keeping security invisible as we've gone through this transition. And we've done that in a few ways. From really simple things like the Zoom web conferences that we're all a part of every day. We've taken steps to make those more secure by just building in passwords to every meeting in a way that people don't have to think about it. People don't have to enter a password every time they create a meeting or join a meeting. That's just, to illustrate really the way we try to roll out security to our end users is so that they don't have to think about it and it can be invisible. And so this extends into, here at Nutanix, it's also a core principle to use our own products, of course. And so we've really ramped up the scale of our Frame desktop as a service so that everybody can work securely from home. And part of that is also using our Flow microsegmentation product to make sure that all of our Frame desktops, our virtual desktops, and our developer VMs that are sitting in our data centers that our developers work on every day are secured. And Flow lets that happen out of the box so that our end users don't have to think about it. They don't have to think about firewall rules because as these virtual machines come up, the Flow microsegmentation rule sets are already in place. So that makes security completely invisible for end users, for developers. And for my team, my security operations team, we're able to keep things running as invisibly as possible by running all of our Splunk infrastructure, our security information and event management, all of our alerting. That's running, of course, on Nutanix hyperconverged infrastructure on a highly available global infrastructure. So our SOC has been able to continue running without missing a beat.
Thank you, Sebastian. We're now going to hear from Chetan Shah, who is responsible for the product management of our security portfolio at Nutanix, on how we are baking security into our products and services with the North Star of making security simple and invisible. Over to you, Chetan.
Thank you, Indu. There are three key pillars to realizing this vision of making security invisible. The most effective approach starts with a platform with security built in. We do that by integrating security first during design and development. So at deployment, you have an out-of-the-box, secure by default platform. The platform features self-healing operations and non-disruptive patching. And it's backed by the assurance of stringent certifications. Number two, Nutanix provides native controls with one-click simplicity, such as encryption, key management, microsegmentation, and identity and access management, so you can safely run your workloads and protect your data. Number three, through the Nutanix Ready program, we deliver fully validated partner security solutions, enabling a comprehensive defense-in-depth strategy. And the best part is the Nutanix platform runs in any cloud, private or public, enabling a secure and seamless hybrid cloud journey. Let's take a closer look at a couple of examples. Now, Sebastian talked a lot about remote work and the security challenges. Nutanix is well known for its world-class VDI solutions, and we're enhancing the security of digital desktops even further. Security starts with our Nutanix hypervisor with built-in integrity protection. We're adding new capabilities such as support for Microsoft's virtualization-based security and credential guard to protect against sophisticated threats to memory. Nutanix Flow is microsegmentation built into AHV. We're enhancing and simplifying VDI security with policy-based controls enabling user identity access to applications. With the theme of encryption everywhere, we're extending our native data at rest encryption and key manager solution to protect against new threats in remote office locations. And finally, we're launching a new Security Central service that provides end-to-end continuous monitoring and compliance. Another key concern from our customers is ransomware. And here we're guided by a framework of prevent, detect, and recover. And we have built-in cyber resilience across the full lifecycle of data. From a prevention standpoint, we have Zero Trust Identity Access Management Service with multi-factor authentication and robust role-based access control to mitigate threat entry. From prevention perspective, Nutanix Files solution provides built-in file activity monitoring, and that has been enhanced recently to deal with detection of suspicious files and blocking and alerting in response. From a recovery standpoint, Nutanix has advanced disaster recovery services that are built in. Additionally, we're enhancing Nutanix file snapshots to make them immutable, and Nutanix Object Store to ensure write-once, read-many access to storage to protect against tampering. So these are just a couple of ways in lieu of how we're making security frictionless for our customers.
And last but not least, our emerging and rapidly growing Xi cloud portfolio provides us yet another opportunity to reimagine security and make it simple and invisible. I'm now going to turn to our Chief Security Architect, Bala Nirumala, to tell us how we are going about doing this. Over to you, Bala.
Thank you, Indu. Let me start off with our approach to cloud security. We all know that we live in the world of assumed breach, where determined adversaries are performing targeted attacks successfully. So it's not a question of if, but a question of when somebody gets compromised. The framework that Ketan talked about earlier, prevent, detect, recover, is the framework that we have used and we continue to use to secure our cloud. We continuously assess the security state of our services to identify the vulnerabilities and fix them in time. We follow security development lifecycle to identify the threats to our service and plan for prevention and mitigation ahead of time. For example, for front-end defenses, we have DDoS and WAF protection. For insider protection, we have zero persistent administrators and restricted access with two-factor authentication. To reduce the blast radius, we use least service design principles and network segmentation. And we know that we cannot prevent all the attacks from happening, so we have invested in continuous security monitoring and incident response processes to handle the security incidents. In regards to the theme of making security invisible, data at rest encryption in Xileap is a great example of how we made security invisible. When customers use Xileap, customers' data is encrypted at rest by default. Encryption and decryption are handled automatically and transparently without customers having to do anything. Going with the principle of having secure defaults, we also enforce two-factor authentication on our Xi portal by default. Finally, security is a top priority at Nutanix. We believe security is a constant journey, and we continue to make improvements to our service to protect your data. Thank you.
What you heard from Ketan, Bala, and Sebastian just now was how we follow our true north of making security invisible, whether it's in our core product offering, in our internal IT and system operations, or whether our cloud offering. A demo is worth a million words, so what we want to do next is to transition to a demo of Flow and Security Central so that you can see for yourself how the products and services that we are building incorporate our true north of making security invisible.
Hi, my name is Abhishek Tiwari. I'm lead product manager for Nutanix Flow. Before I start my demo, I want to give you a quick overview of Flow. Flow is our microsegmentation offering that provides a ubiquitous enforcement engine to secure your applications, virtual desktops, branch office deployments, and even containers in future. Flow is fully decoupled from underlying infrastructure, which means you can use Flow to secure your on-prem infrastructure and applications, your applications running on Xi hybrid cloud, or on Nutanix clusters running on AWS. Flow also comes with Security Central that can help you simplify and streamline your security operations using day zero planning, continuous monitoring with dashboards, and compliance using audit checks. Let's dig deeper into each of these, namely planning, enforcement, and compliance in our demo. Your journey with Nutanix Flow starts with security planning. Here, you can split your infrastructure by cluster, VLAN, categories, or even the range of IP addresses. Once you select the VMs that you are planning to secure, you can start exploring those VM selection for traffic behavior. So you can look at which VM is talking to which other VM, ports and protocols on which they are talking, and even the details of flow in last 24 hours for these entities. You can add and remove a VM based on the traffic behavior. You can look at inbound and outbound traffic for a specific VM. And once you're satisfied with your selection, you can go and assign categories. Once categories are assigned, you are ready to write policy for these VMs. And most common policy with Flow is the application policy. So here I have two-tier application, which is protected by Flow with a set of inbound and outbound with a few simple clicks. In addition to application policy, we also have isolation policy. Isolation policy helps you isolate your environment, such as production and testing in this case. Last but not least, in order to prevent from malicious VM doing lateral movement in your infrastructure, we have quarantine policy, where you select a VM that's infected by malware and quarantine it with few simple quick clicks. Once you've built with your least privilege zero trust enforcement with Flow, you can monitor this for violations, enforcement, and security posture using Security Central. So here we have multi-cloud inventory from AWS, Nutanix Cluster, and Azure. It gives you your compliance scores for PCI, STIG, HIPAA. It gives you your microsegmentation allowed and denied flows, your security status of VMs that are protected, and a whole lot of other findings that are relevant to your understanding the security in your infrastructure. Let's dig deeper into Nutanix Cluster and see the findings. So there are 337 findings broken down into various categories of network, host, and data security. Let's take a look at network security in this case. Now, network security here is basically trying to show you exactly all the VMs with open ports and how you can actually use Flow to secure those ports. So you can select these VMs and start securing them with Flow. Lastly, you can take all of this and understand your security posture against a predefined compliance standard, such as PCI DSS, which is Payment Card Industry Standard, or STIG policy checks. So as you've seen, in 10 minutes, we started from a blank slate with a few VMs and cluster. We achieved zero trust enforcement with Flow, and then provide and have full dashboards to understand our security posture with Security Central. That's the power of invisible security with Nutanix. This concludes our demo. Thank you.
Wow, that was a really cool demo. Thank you, Abhishek. We haven't quite gotten to the Steve Jobs level of complexity yet for security, but that is our true north, and we will continue the journey till we get there. I want you to take away 3 things from what you have heard so far. The first one is there has never been a harder time for a security professional. Number 2, Nutanix has decided to make making security invisible our true north, because we understand and feel the pain that you as a security professional or as an IT professional or a DevOps professional have to go through to keep your environment secure. And number 3, it really takes a village to make security happen and to make security invisible. And what you really need is a platform provider with an ecosystem that is able to bring all of this together for you as a customer. And we really believe at Nutanix that we can be that platform technology provider that makes this entire security ecosystem come together so that we can really dramatically simplify security for years and years to come.
Thanks, Indu. We are just minutes away from the finale of the .NEXT show, featuring Trevor Noah and a whole host of amazing performers from across the globe. But before that, if you want to actually experience the things that we've covered over the past 2 days with some hands-on demos, then there's no better way to do it than to take a test drive. And there's nobody better to tell us about it than Mudika and Monica. Let's take a ride.
Well, if you've been with us for the last 2 days, you've seen a lot of announcements and innovations coming out of Nutanix. So I guess the next normal question would be, where can you try all this out, this new functionality, the new product capabilities we've announced? To do that, I'm going to invite Madhukar Kumar to join me. Madhukar is our VP of Product Marketing at Nutanix, and he's going to come and talk about how you can get your hands on this cool tech. Welcome, Madhukar.
Thank you, Monica. Very happy to be here. So we heard earlier that, in our journey to make Nutanix be available and be able to run it anywhere, we had to virtualize our entire stack. And so think about Test Drive as a fully functioning product. We were able to take that entire Nutanix functionality, goodness, products, and be able to make it available through a browser. So to answer your question, what is Test Drive? It's really the full Nutanix experience that you can get using nothing but an internet connection and a browser.
That's great. So what are the specific customer benefits of Test Drive?
So I think the biggest benefit is you don't need any hardware, you don't need any software, any configuration. All you need is just go sign up and choose an experience, and you can go and see the entire breadth of Nutanix products and functionalities in the experiences.
Awesome. It's truly zero touch the way you're describing. You know what I believe? Seeing is believing. So why don't you show us a demo of the Test Drive?
So as you can see, you could go to Nutanix.com, and once you sign up for test drive, you come to this page where you can choose your experience. If you want to go learn about how to create a private cloud or a hybrid cloud or backup and disaster recovery or automation operations, you choose the tab and then just put in your email address, your official email address. As soon as you do it, within a few seconds or a minute, you will now get an email that will take you directly inside of test drive. Once you click on the link on that test drive, you will be taken straight to a browser window where you have Prism Central, and now you have the full Nutanix functionality here. As you can see, there is a guided tour here, and you can follow the step-by-step instructions of the tour to learn about that experience. Or you could also invoke the chatbot at the bottom right to ask any questions that you might have while you go through that process.
Well, that seemed really easy, Madhukar. Thank you for showing us how it looks like. So where does one go to get started with the test drive?
Yeah, Monica, there's just two simple options. One, all the attendees can go sign up for a test drive live, where they can follow through an instructor's instructions while going through test drive directly in there. Or two, they can go to nutanix.com/one-platform with a hyphen and sign up for a test drive over there too.
Perfect. Thank you, Madhukar, so much for sharing the insights on test drive.
Thank you.
And there you have it, folks. The last 2 days have been chock full of insights around future of work, of healthcare, education, all the different topics that are so important and relevant in today's day and age. We talked about technology partnerships. We talked about, we heard from your peers in the industry and how they are navigating the challenging times. We also heard from Nutanix product experts in innovations that we are bringing to market to help you run better, faster, anywhere. I do hope you'll check out the test drive and also go to Nutanix.com for more information. I'm really, really grateful that you joined us, and thank you so much for your time.
Now, I've learned a little bit about TV during my career, and I'll tell you this. Being part of one of the most iconic shows on telly is pretty much as good as it gets. Being on 2 of the most iconic shows on TV is unheard of, but 3, stop it. Never happens, unless maybe you're Zach Woods. He's been a featured player on The Office, Veep and Silicon Valley, and now he's a featured player here at .next. You can check out his interview with Nutanix CMO Ben Gibson on demand, but here's a few highlights to whet your appetite.
Zach has starred in what I consider, humbly, some iconic shows. He played a hilarious role in The Office, more recently on HBO with Silicon Valley, and a lot of other things too. Hey Zach, I want to talk about The Office.
That was a thrilling but also terrifying experience because I'd never done a television show before, and all of a sudden I'd been kind of cannonballed into one of my favorite shows at the time.
There were so many knowing moments in that show where it just captured, I think, the culture of tech. And you played a great character on that show, Jared Dunn. You were like the non-coder on that show.
Right.
So do you get a bunch of questions all the time from folks that want you to comment on innovative compression techniques for rich multimedia experiences across the next generation of internet?
Constantly. Right before we started this call, I had to ask the tech advisors where the camera was on the phone so I knew where to look. That is my degree of discomfort with tech, where on an iPhone, I don't know where the camera is. I am the least tech conversant person, so it was a strange thing to be meeting all these people who were eager to have conversations that they would quickly realize I was incapable of.
Well, make sure you check out Zach's entire session, which is on demand. It's really not one to be missed. So, my friends, we've come to the end of our final general session, but don't close your computers just yet. In a few moments, the finale of the .next show begins. And just look at me. I am hardly dressed for such an epic extravaganza. So don't excuse me, I'm going to go and get changed, maybe grab a glass of champagne, and get ready for the .next show finale. See you in a mo.